So, joining me today, a bit of a revamp type of go that we're kind of having here. We're going to do the weekend recap. Now, normally it's Matt and I. Matt worked a 14-hour day today on the Lord's Day of Sunday. So, it's just me joining you at Craig Allen FNP, but it's not just me joining you. See, we have a co-host, one of the co-hosts on Between the Links. You can find him on FanSided MMA, My MMA News. You can find him with Cageside Press. He is also the host of The Bottom Line with none other than Davidson Baker. Davidson, thanks so much for joining me. I had the chance to go on The Bottom Line. It seems like months, years. I was on the show a long time ago, and it was a lot of fun. And listen, man, I can't wait for another episode of it. Thanks so much for joining me. Man, what's going on today?
Not much, man. I just got done working about a 9-hour shift at the day job. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, not even like letting any proverbial cat out of the bag, I'm trying to have you back on said Bottom Line for UFC Vancouver.
Ooh, little Canadian connection there.
That's what I'm saying. I thought I reached out to you about that, but,
yeah.
You know, something along those lines. Pleasure to be here, my man.
Man, really looking forward to it. And listen, I'm going to start things off actually live before we came on air. The first thing that I'm going to put up is a poll. I put up a poll after our UFC Uruguay card. And my question to audience members, everybody out there on Twitter, you know that we have the Twitter purge every single week, so it's very important that I ask a staple question to Fight Night Picks. Post Uruguay, you're looking back on the card, giving it a letter grade. What are you going with? And an overwhelming 50% went with a letter grade of C for Uruguay. You have a couple of votes for A, 34% with B, and you had 13% with other explained. Speedy Magoo said in the bottom a D. Davidson, it's easy to do this after the fact. If I were to give a grade before, and listen, Matt and I didn't, I probably would have given it a C or below. Anything below, it wasn't one of those cards that had a lot of name value attached. But after the fact, what are you going with and why here?
If I can kind of indulge on a greater sample size of a grading scale, I'd probably like veer into like B minus, like C plus territory, like somewhere in there. Like, I liked a lot of things about this card. I thought it was a fun card. I'm one that sits on the side of the fence that, I mean, if we're talking about the main event here, let's just be honest. I mean, I wasn't enthralled with excitement, but I've kind of penned the expression that I appreciated Valentina's performance for what it was. And then, I mean, the co-main event, I mean, if you didn't like the co-main event, I don't know what's wrong with you. I thought, hey, I'll call us both out right now. Did we both – it was a close fight, but did we both kind of whiff on Garagorri earlier last week on Between the Links? We both were high. We both were pretty high on Bandenay, if I remember correctly.
I'm on record. And listen, the people of social media, the people of YouTube are pretty damn quick to point out when I'm wrong. I said that Liz Carmouche got the better of Valentina Shevchenko. Now, I would assume that most people listening to this would think, hey, that means she won the fight and there's a win on her record. But everybody took that as, oh, you know, Liz Carmouche absolutely destroyed Valentina Shevchenko. That's not what I said. But I will go on record as saying, and I have two things, so I wrote it down. 28 of 32 in these 2-minute breakdown picks. So you can take those to the bank. You can take that however you want, I guess. My one wrong pick this week was Luis Eduardo Garagorri. I had no idea he was going to put on a performance like he did. So yeah, were we wrong on Between the Links? Maybe, but I definitely was. It's going to live on for eons and eons. And so far, that's the video that the majority of people wanted to see from us on the 2-minute breakdowns, and everybody gets to see me being wrong.
Yeah, man, and if I could just point out with that performance, too, he was so quick with his striking. It seemed like he was like 1 or 2 steps ahead of Bandenay with like every single combination that he threw. A guy that in Bandenay, too, that is kind of known for being like more of a quicker base set of striker. I've never like thought Bandenay, you know, through his obviously super up really quick you know, that super up moment when he knocked out Martin Bravo in like, 24 seconds. Yeah. And then, you know, the 3 losses in a row now. The Benitez fight, for what it was worth, you know, was as exciting a fight that a minute could give you. But other than that, I've always thought that he was, you know, technical, but always faster. Like, he was faster than Arnett. Arnett was just more accurate. I thought Garagorri was 1 step ahead of him the whole time.
And maybe Garagorri's one of those guys that we see, and it was kind of tough, and Matt and I kind of talked about it. He's one of those guys that if this fight was on any other any other card, if it was on even on another fight night card, this is probably going to be one of those long forgotten prelim type of fights. But the fact that it was on the main card, you had a native Uruguayan make his UFC debut. It was a really good showcase fight for him. It kind of reminds me of, and I know I talk about it all the time, but Gavin Tucker, Sam Sicilian Halifax, who was undefeated. Nobody really knew who he was, and he put on a really good performance. And then he's kind of on the map until Rick Glenn. And Luis Eduardo Garagorri hasn't seen or met his proverbial Rick Glenn just yet, but hopefully we get to see him in another decent matchup. And that kind of brings us to the start of the card. So, of course, we had Shevchenko, Carmouche in the main. We alluded to Luque and Perry in the co-main. But to start off the card, you had a couple of fighters that were in difficult positions and realistically won in a really tough spot here after the card. In Veronica Macedo taking on Polyana Viana. And I know, personally, I had Viana in this fight. I know she took on a Brazilian thug out in the streets. Viana was able to get the win there. And I mean, listen, Veronica Macedo put on a great performance, so kudos to her. What did you think of that fight, as quick as it was?
I was incredibly impressed, and I'm not even gonna try to lie or try to toot my own horn here, but I did do some extensive study on the prelims for this card because it fizzled through on my end. But I was supposed to do a podcast with somebody else to talk about the prelims, and I had to pick them all. And I picked Macedo when I picked Macedo after I did that kind of extensive film study, just because I thought the only hope that Viana had was getting it to the ground. Now, I was right in my result, but I was not right at all in how I thought the fight would play out if the fight went to the ground, and that's why I was so impressed with Macedo. I think even though she's 1-3 in the UFC right now, and Viana too, honestly, you bring up the whole beat up the thug in the streets type thing. Most of the time fighters come in the UFC and have 4-fight deals. Those 4-fight deals would be up for both of them. Could you see either of them getting let go? I think they bring them both back.
I think they do too, and you can really sell that. It's the same as Jared Gordon. I mean, what would you do in a street fight? Me personally, I'd probably run away. But B, I'd probably start striking. And for Jared Gordon, he's one of those guys that, listen, if you're in a street fight and somebody goes to pull guard, they have some tricks up their sleeve. I mean, if you go back and watch Mark Coleman when he took on Shogun Rua in Pride, and you look at the melee that ensued after Shogun broke his arm, Vanderlei Silva pulled guard on Phil Baroni, and Phil Baroni had to be fearing for his life in that one. So for Polyana Viana, hopefully the UFC brings her back. For Veronica Macedo, a big win, one in South America as well, and I think that's really going to resonate. And then if we move on to our next fight, listen, I was barbecuing at the time. So I watched the Macedo fight inside, and then I got all excited for Alex De Silva, who, listen, he looked good in his... he's looked good. He's got a good record. He's one of those guys that's definitely marketable. And then for his opponent, Silva, I mean, what can you say? For Vargas, rather. Kazula Vargas was a guy, he's kind of later on in his career. He's making his UFC debut. You can try and sell him to a certain subsection of fans. But, man, he really, really fizzled out in this fight. I mean, he didn't really seem to mount any type of offense, and he seemed to be turtling up more than anything in this fight. What did you think of it?
I think a lot of what you said. I mean, turtling up is a good characterization for what he did for a lot of rounds 2 and 3. I thought he did well, capitalizing off of where he was in a bad position for most of round 1. But at the end of the day, obviously, De Silva, a guy getting off the schneid and in a bad way somewhat in terms of, he came into this fight 20 wins, 20 finishes. Yeah. And so, now he gets a win by decision. He's gone the whole 15 minutes. That can be an invaluable experience for a guy that, as, I love Brandon Fitzgerald, but it seemed like he continuously kept alluding to it as many fights as he has years on this planet. Dude, we get it. I mean, come on. You've said it 100 times. Yeah. You know what I mean? I like Fitzgerald, but yeah, I thought he was really hammering that one home.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those fights, again, probably one where it's a regional card. It's the first time the UFC is going to this country where a lot of people are going to forget about this fight. But De Silva's able to eke out the win. He's able to get the decision. He looked good in this fight. And for Vargas, yeah, you kind of have to wonder what's next. Does he get another fight in the UFC? If so, we don't really know who it's going to be against. It's really tough to try and predict things like that. If you look at our next fight, I was kind of surprised by the result that we got. You had Freitas taking on Chris Gutierrez. Chris Gutierrez went on a number of shows this past week, and Listen, if anything was remembered through all of those interviews, it's the fact that he's in a custody battle for his child. He alluded to it in his post-fight speech, and it was kind of touching what he had to say. But realistically, in this fight, I mean, I had it scored for De Freitas. Were you surprised with the decision here?
I was not. I actually had it for Gutierrez. I had it 29-28. I gave round 1 to De Freitas. I thought he was landing more of his shots effectively. But then it was the same thing that won that Ryan McDonald fight for Chris Gutierrez in rounds 2 and 3. Those low kicks, man. I mean, I'm not here to don any type of tagline on Chris Gutierrez, and obviously, I don't have much of an argument against people scoring it 29-28 for De Freitas. I mean it's realistic.
One of those judges had it 30-27 for
30-27,
which is crazy.
Yeah, I think that's out of control. But oh god. but I wouldn't have argued 29-28, to the grave. I thought it was a really close fight. But at the end of the day, like I said, the same thing in the McDonald fight. I'm not going to don him a future contender, don him a future champion. I'm not going to do that. I think he's a good fighter. I think he's a pretty well-rounded fighter for what we've seen somewhat so far. See how I'm a little hesitant to kind of coin him that.
Yeah.
But it's those low kicks, dude. He is really, really good at chopping his opponent's legs down.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And like we kind of said, I mean, the two 29-28s, and then all of a sudden one of the judges has it 30-27 for De Freitas, which I saw fans and media members alike. I saw a few of them out there scoring at 30-27 for De Freitas. I would disagree with that. I had it 29-28. But listen, Gutierrez able to get the win. That's all that really matters. And if you move into the next fight on the card, you had Rogerio Bontorin taking on Mr. Paiva. And if you look at Raulian Paiva's win, rather loss. And I mean, he didn't lose as bad as maybe Mike Perry did. And I've got a gif up on the screen of what his face looks like. But first of all, let's go back a little bit in this fight. I mean, Bontorin took quite a bit of punishment there. We had the referee calling for a pause in the action, Osiris Maya, and listen, Maya with the salt and pepper, one heck of a good look for a referee. I mean, there are some photogenic refs out there. We've seen Gary Copeland become a star with PFL.
Gary Copeland,
I mean, he's bodied up, but Osiris Maya with the beard, it's a good look. But for Bontorin, I was surprised they didn't end the action. Maybe, I mean, the cut was just below his eye, and that was kind of a theme of the night. There were multiple fighters with welts, mice, cuts below their eye. Fights continued. But we had a call for a stoppage in the action for just a brief moment. Then you saw the knee connect for Bontorin against Paiva, and everybody kind of wondered, oh, what's going on here? Even the announcing team kind of seemed to be surprised that there was a stoppage in the action. And then you finally saw what happened. Listen, you had talked about previewing this fight extensively. It didn't come through. What kind of notes did you have in this fight going in, and were you surprised by the outcome here?
I was going into this fight. I picked Paiva in this fight, and I thought Paiva was doing well up until obviously they kind of stopped the action. And it was a moment in which when they stopped the action for a second time, like you said, everyone's kind of like, what the hell is going on? Going into this fight, I thought that Bontorin was quicker, but Paiva, from what I saw on film, and obviously you look at Bontorin and Paiva's action in the UFC thus far, I mean, very similar to a T other than the results. Bontorin getting a close decision win, somewhat close decision win, some would say even more widespread, over a tough and top prospect in Magomed Bibilatov back in February. And then Raulian Paiva, some people believing he won his UFC debut against Kai Kara France, who a lot of people are dubbing as the next big thing at flyweight. And in those like separate film studies, I saw that Paiva probably would have the advantage on the feet. He was the longer fighter. He was a little bit taller. He's a little more rangy, a little more extensive with his strikes. And Bontorin, I thought, would have the advantage if the fight went to the ground. And what we saw was a little bit of what flyweights can carry in as exciting of a capacity as they do. And for a lot of reasons why a lot of people don't want to see him go, it was back and forth, and it was great, man. I mean, I think it was one of my favorite fights for as long as it lasted on the entire card, to be honest with you. And in my opinion, someone put out on Twitter, maybe they should run it back. I wouldn't be opposed to it.
No, I mean, I'm sure, Bontorin probably wants to move up the ladder, course ranked 8th on the night. And listen, just like we had a week before with Matt Schnell, keep the flyweights around. I mean, this was a really, really fun fight. A couple of ranked guys. And, of course, you're going to think that maybe bigger and better things come the way of Bontorin. And for Paiva, listen, just heal up the eye injury. He should be back relatively soon. If Colby Covington can fight in a fight like he did against Robbie Lawler with a nasty gash like that, and I hate to use the word, but hey, maybe Paiva can come back next week and we see him come back a stronger fighter. And listen, I mean, in her next fight, you talk about somebody coming back as a stronger fighter, somebody on a losing streak looking to kind of right the ship. You had Tecia Torres taking on Marina Rodriguez. In this one, I had Rodriguez to win. Torres, she's fought top competition. She's really had a big promotional push. Of course, the affiliation with Raquel Pennington. I mean, we've seen what that type of affiliation had for Nina Ansaroff, of course, being partners with Amanda Nunes. So you kind of assumed, and a lot of people would have had Torres winning this fight, but Rodriguez just had such a distinct length advantage in this one. Were you surprised how this fight played out? I thought Torres was relatively, maybe not gun shy, but she wasn't really there, I guess. It wasn't a performance that we normally see from her.
No, it wasn't. And let me ask you a question really quickly on the comeback, Craig. When you looked at the betting lines, because I know you crunch those a little bit yourselves, or a lot of bit yourself. I don't really watch over your shoulder all the time, believe it or not. When you're looking at the lines that are closing going into this card, did that line stick out to you as like I don't agree with that? Did that, yes or no?
I don't know if I'd say it did. I mean, you got to kind of rest on the laurels of what Tecia Torres has done in the past. The fact that she's ranked 8, taking on Rodriguez, who there's no number next to her name here. But I mean, at the same time, you got to think of it as every time Andrei Arlovski fights, anytime Travis Brown fought near the end of his tenure, these guys, every now and again, you see the odds are maybe too close, or you look at the odds that were in our main event, and I'm not the type like our favorite Mr. The Greek, and I won't talk about line movement too much because that means absolutely nothing to me. As opposed to what some people say about me on social media, I actually do watch the fights, and I actually do put some stock into these betting lines. So, Davidson, this isn't a conversation that we had previous. This isn't something you're lobbing me something. I'm hitting it off a tee or whatever baseball analogy you want to use. But was I surprised? Maybe not so much, but I was just so surprised by the performance of Torres. I was surprised that she didn't want to go wrestle heavy. I mean, a smaller fighter, she didn't want to engage in the pocket. That's just not what we saw. And as you can see up on the screen, and Davidson can't, but everybody watching at home can, 58 to 98 were the total strikes, 98 by way of Rodriguez. And I mean, that's what really stuck out to me. It's just Torres didn't show up here. So maybe she has a number next to her name in her next fight. But listen, this is the question I have for you. A, and I'm assuming your answer here, but does she fight in the UFC next? And B, if so, who do you put her up against? Because it's kind of a lose-lose in a lot of circumstances.
Got to be Karolina Kowalkiewicz.
Oh, boy.
Karolina Kowalkiewicz, I will be honest with you. Whenever I had that first thought bubble pop in my head, I was on Ticia's Tapology page, and I was like scrolled down enough to see most of her UFC fights, and then I just hit back out of, lazy nature. And I was just like, yeah, I don't think her and Karolina have fought. I'm pretty sure they have not fought. Do you remember a time that they have? I don't.
No.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure they haven't fought. I think that fight makes a lot of sense. I think both of those girls are obviously on pretty dreadful losing streaks at this point, and a couple of girls you can put together that, have had names in this division, have been around in this division. Karolina Kowalkiewicz getting a title shot at one point. Tecia Torres being, let's be honest here, we can talk about Tecia Torres' 4-fight losing streak, and this is what I was going to say, and why I somewhat disagree with your answer to my question. I saw the line, and it was like, whoa to me. I was really high on Rodriguez in this matchup. I did not, though, as you said, I did not expect Tecia Torres to come out and freeze. But she did, especially for the first, round and a half. She kind of started to try to get it going, I thought, towards 2 to 3 minutes into round 2, but Rodriguez just absolutely shut down any type of offensive attack. I think Torres and Kowalkiewicz makes sense, and on the topic of Torres too, look at her last 4 losses. Now it's Marina Rodriguez, Weili Zhang, Joanna Jacek, and Jessica Andrade. I mean, come on, man. It doesn't get much tougher than that in a 4-fight stretch in that division.
And I mean, the other thing too, we don't know what's going on in her personal life either. I know they mentioned it on the broadcast, the fact that she was training back in Florida rather than in Colorado. So you have to kind of wonder how those factors play into a fight like this. And it'll be interesting to see who she gets. I think Kowalkiewicz makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's two bigger names. You can market them even if they're not winning. And maybe it's a loser goes home. It's kind of tough with Kowalkiewicz as well because she's kind of talked about having one foot out the door, and you never like to hear conversations like that. But if we move into our next fight at heavyweight, listen, this guy's got both feet in the deep end, whatever type of analogy you want to use. Ciryl Gane taking on Rafael Pessoa. And listen, I mean, let's give the Brazilian some credit. So he's making his UFC debut. He is also undefeated. He threw the kitchen sink at Gane. He threw as hard as he could. He put everything into his strikes. I thought he looked like if Ciryl Gane decided to sit on the couch for 4 or 5 months and just eat Cheetos. That's what he would look like. And for Gane, this is a guy, multiple-time world champion in Muay Thai. He fought in K1. He's undefeated in MMA. We talked about it on Between the Links, the fact that he had that win over Adam Dijkse, who a lot of Canadians, a lot of international MMA fans had on their radar as a possibility of him moving into the UFC and cleaning up, just absolutely dominating. And for Dijkse, I heard through the grapevine that there were some contractual issues that he had to stay with TKO, so there's one thing. But also, he's lost 2 in MMA fairly recently, one of them being to Gane. And 3, he's also recently announced on Facebook last week that he's going to move into boxing. So kind of a tough go for Adam Dijkse, but for Ciryl Gane, man, like what a performance this guy put on in his UFC debut. He looked absolutely fantastic. He waited and waited and waited, and then finally just absolutely unloaded, and it was a submission finish that he was able to get. Was that anything that you would have predicted?
Not at all. Not especially because now, would I put outside of the realm that Gane would have had submission skills? I mean, I wouldn't have put it at the forefront of my mind, but I wouldn't have completely excluded that possibility. But would he score a submission inside round 1 against a guy? I mean, Bisping said it. Is Pessoa like a jiu-jitsu guy? I mean, would you label him? Because he's gonna get the submission on the jiu-jitsu guy, and I'm just like, is he a jiu-jitsu guy though? He's got some taps. I mean, he has in the past. When I saw him on film, I saw with my own eyes him get some taps. But is he a jiu-jitsu guy? No. Is Gane getting the fight to the floor though, and like you said, waiting and waiting and waiting, and then finally getting his opportunity, and Pessoa just trapped inside that arm triangle? Man, thoroughly impressed. And were you aware? I would assume you are, being the shark in which you read MMA news throughout the week. Were you aware 7 people turned this fight down?
Yeah.
7 opponents turned this fight down. That guy is going to be a problem.
A guy who was 3-0 coming into the UFC, and you have 7 people turning him down. So now the question is, who does he take on next? Now you've got a guy who just continues to finish opponents quickly. He made his Octagon debut. It was something that a lot of hardcore MMA fans were really paying attention to. They knew he was going to be a problem. Now you have to wonder. Now there's always guys like the Chris De La Rocas, the Daniel Columbos, the Anthony Freight Train Hamilton, who's no longer in the UFC, but there's always guys like that for a guy like Ciryl Gane to fight. And maybe, and listen, you might disagree with me here, Juan Adams just took on Greg Hardy. It was a really tough test. I would assume that he would say no to this fight, but realistically, like a top 15 guy probably isn't next for Gane, would you think?
No, because I don't think, I'm telling you, man, every heavyweights manager is allergic to every top 15 heavyweights manager for the next several months until it becomes inevitable has all of a sudden developed seasonal allergies to the name Ciryl Gane. Like, do you want to take this fight, Ciryl? I can't hear you. Got a cold, man. Like, nobody is going to want to hear any of that on the manager side of any heavyweight in the top 15. I'm talking for a while. This guy looks the part of being an absolute nightmare to fight. Here, a couple of ideas I had. Adam Wieczorek would kind of make sense. I mean, obviously the personality thing that would give us context clues as to whether or not we could formulate an opinion on whether he'd take the fight or not. We don't know. I don't think the guy speaks English. But at the end of the day, I would give it a shot. I would keep him, or, a guy that you've talked about. Where is he? Maybe a Juan Espino. Maybe somebody like that, like a Spain versus France kind of thing. I would keep him far away from Jairzinho until, maybe in the future. Oh, my God, that would be incredible.
And I've seen that one thrown out there, too. I don't think that one makes much sense.
No, that's not going to happen next for sure. I guess if you want to try to get him into the top 15 as soon as possible, maybe hold him in the wings for winner of Augusto Sakai and Marcin Tybura type of thing. I don't know. I mean, the guy looks like he is ready to hit the fast track. Just keep him away from guys like Rosenstruik, maybe like Sergey Pavlovich for now.
If realistically looking at from 1 to 15, Sakai, Tybura, Tuivasa, Oleinik, Walt Harris, Blagoy Ivanov, who a lot of people are finally seeing, man, maybe it's a boring fighting style, but the guy can point and the guy can win, and he has an incredible story if you have a chance to go back and look at it. And the run that he had in not just Bellator, but World Series of Fighting, and that one PFL fight before it was, the PFL that we know now and all the celebrities involved. But I mean, Abdurkimov,
for the record, I think he and Lewis is going to be a banger. I think he and Lewis are going to throw.
Exactly. Lots of wins that I could see him having against top 15 opponents. So, yeah, I think there's going to be some seasonal affective disorder, some allergy issues upcoming, and a lot of people that aren't going to want to answer the phone when it's Cyril Gane's manager calling. But if we move into our featured prelim bout, a fight that a lot of hardcore fans were really excited about, this compared to our co-main event that we had. Yeah, Gilbert Burns moving up to 170, it made a lot of sense. And he's taken on a guy who's looked, I think the right word to use, or the right phrase to use, would be wishy-washy in Mr. Kunchenko. And if you look at Alexei Kunchenko, yes, he's undefeated. He had a lot of finishes when he was a part of M1 Global. He was a champ over there. Comes into the UFC, and did his performances excite you? No. I mean, was he winning fights? Yeah. But Gilbert Burns is one of those guys, and I've been saying it for a long time. If he's able to pull every facet of his MMA game together, we know he's an explosive striker when he wants to be. We know how good his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is. He can wrestle, he can grapple, he can get the takedowns. He's one of those complete martial artists. And in this fight, I know a lot of people kind of mentioned as well that he's going to have a little bit of a height, a little bit of a reach advantage. He's going to be the bigger guy. But once he stepped into that octagon, he did look like the bigger guy. And he put on a pretty decent performance here. Now, were you surprised by the decision? Did anything really stick out to you in this fight? Of course, it being a Gilbert Burns decision win.
A lot of things happened in this fight that I expected, again, without me getting the end result exactly correct. I did pick Kunchenko. I thought it would be close. I thought it would be tightly contested. I thought it would be competitive. And for a large part of it, it wasn't. However, I mean, with Burns pretty much doing exactly what I thought he would when he would get a hold of him, I thought Kunchenko was maybe going to be a little bit better at separating and maybe capitalizing on strikes off the break. I mean, if you watch any of this guy's fights from when he was the champion at M1, and honestly, I'll go on the record and say it, holding the M1 welterweight title, that's, I mean, welterweight, lightweight, and featherweight in M1 right now. Incredible weight classes for if you're talking on the scale of outside of the UFC, amazing weight classes. And for him to defend that belt a bunch of times, man, I think this is a hell of a week for the Burns family, man. Herbert Burns, I mean, say what you want about his opponent. He looked pretty solid and had a little bit of adversity to go through. And now you have Gilbert getting a win over a very tough guy on 2 weeks' notice. I would not be opposed to Gilbert Burns getting a top 15 at 170 next. However, man, I think welterweight right now in the UFC is as difficult to get a top 15 guy to sign on the dotted line for an unranked party as it gets in the UFC right now. I mean, maybe lightweight, but
there's so many guys from 15 to 30. And I mean,
maybe even 40.
Realistically, yeah. I mean, there's so many good fighters. It has to be a tough thing. as far as matchmakers and management are concerned. And this fight really showed you, again, Gilbert Burns, he can do quite a few different things. And the stat that jumps out in front of me as I'm looking at it, 63 total strikes by Burns compared to 115 landed by Kunchenko. But again, it was that wrestling, that top pressure that Burns was able to kind of put up against Kunchenko. The reason why he was able to get the win there. And then we move on to our main card. And the first fight on the main card, I caught some flack for, because I said that Enrique Barzola can put the pressure on the feet. He can strike when he needs to. Of course, I didn't mention it, but in his last fight, we saw that in the third round against Aguilar. And then you look at Bobby Moffett, and yeah, mixed results. I mean, he had that nice win over Chaz Skelly. Was it a win? A lot of people disputed, including Chaz Skelly. Of course, he would. But in this fight, Enrique Barzola, his striking looked decent. His wrestling looked decent. It was pretty much what I expected. What did you think of this fight? And was it a good... It's not one of those curtain jerkers because it's not before the main card, but was this an enticing fight to get people into our main card?
Enticing for the hardcores, and I loved this fight. I had a blast watching this fight, dude, and it played out exactly the way I thought it was going to play out, and here's why. They mentioned it, Bisping. Hey man, I like Bisping on commentary.
So do I.
You can tell Bisping does his homework, because a lot of the things that he's saying or a lot of the things that I'm thinking that I've put pen to paper on going into these cards. And one thing that he said right away is you can see Barzola is obviously respecting the ground game of Bobby Moffett, because going into it, it's very weird to pen the non-American party in a fight as the better wrestler. But you could have said that about Barzola going into this fight. However, Bobby Moffett having the slicker submission skills, I would say, and I think pretty much anyone would agree with me. And so as a result, the fight played out on the feet, other than the fact that I think the biggest factor was those takedowns from Barzola at the ends of round 1 and 2 of fights that high fight IQ, man. And that goes to, kudos to Kevin Aguilar for doing what he did to him. I think Barzola is a very talented 145er. My question to you on the comeback is, how did you score the fight? I thought I could have given it to Moffett. I thought it was razor thin, though.
It could definitely go to Moffett. Of course, it was a split, and I did have it for Barzola, and maybe there's a little bit of bias there. Of course, I had picked Barzola. It's out there. It's in the ethos of the internet. And, of course, it was scored 29-28, 30-27, 29-28. Maybe not the 30-27 there, and like you said as well, those takedowns at the end of the rounds, really something that counts. And like we kind of alluded to as well, high fight IQ for Barzola. This is one of those guys that maybe some casual fans, maybe some people that aren't catching the Uruguayan card on a Saturday night might miss, but this is one of those guys that he just keeps creeping up from the early prelims. He continues on. He can get on a little bit of a roll, and you might have to worry about a guy whose nickname is El Fuerte. And this was an all nickname type of battle because, of course, Bobby Moffett, the Wolfman, really hard-hitting stuff there for me, of course. But listen, a great fight. And in the next one, this was one of those ones that you could preview it as much as you wanted, and there were two different camps. Adolfo Vieira, his BJJ skills are second to none. My question to you, is he the best pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy crossing over into MMA that we've had in the last 2 or 3 years?
Oh, man. You would kind of put the names in the same realm like a Crone Gracie, maybe. But I don't even know if Vieira is going to be very, very difficult to beat. And we said so on Between the Links, you and I both, about Gane and Adolfo Vieira.
I was out, so I just kept feeding stats.
Yeah. It was a performance I expected because Piechota being, he also has a lot of he's a very decorated grappler himself. And while he was tapped by Meerschaert, I think that, and being tapped by Meerschaert is Meerschaert just getting his black belt, I think, if not early this year, late last year. It's not the biggest deal in the world. Like, it's not the biggest blemish in the world. But if you're going to get tapped by Gerald Meerschaert, you're probably going to get tapped by Adolfo Vieira, and that's exactly what happened.
And I mean, Vieira's one of those guys, he's training out of geez, all sorts of different gyms. Nogueira Brothers is one of those affiliations. They also talked about it on the broadcast, but you can see it on social media. Training with Jacare Souza, and man, you couldn't have a better training partner there. Somewhat similar in styles. You can see that his striking's powerful, but he knows when to pick his shots. Another one of those pure BJJ guys that's done great in his transition into MMA. Gary Tonin over at One Championship. But man, I mean, Vieira put on a great performance here, and for Piechota, you have to wonder what's next. I mean, this is a guy he's been lauded with praise. They said a lot of good things about him here over the broadcast. A lot of people online had a lot of good things to say about him. But you just have to wonder what's next, because for Vieira, there's articles being written about him right now that he could be the next champ at 185. But for Piechota, what's next? I mean, what do you think? It's probably got to be one of those, I don't know, 25 down type of guys that you have to take on to get back on a win streak.
Something like that. And I was actually, were you surprised by this booking? Because I kind of was. I think obviously you're going to want to try, again, could be a case of who the hell said yes.
Yeah.
I was a little bit, we really don't know on that end of the spectrum, but I was kind of surprised by this booking a little bit. Maybe give him like a grizzled veteran, like someone like, I don't know, like Tim Boach, maybe Zach Cummings. I think both of those fights would be kind of interesting. If you're already going to give him, you know, a guy in Piechota who, you know, came over as Cage Warriors champion, some guy, McGregor, I think, obviously something that baffles me, and I'm not trying to segue completely off, but like, Cage Warriors champions usually always get brought over to the UFC, right?
Yep.
And a lot of time, and I mean, like, you know, guys like Jack Shore and other guys like that are waiting in the wings where we assume they're going to get their call up soon. How close do you follow Dana White's tweets? Someone brought to his attention about Ross Houston.
Yeah, right? I saw that.
He said, "What's his record? You don't know who this guy is?
What's his record?" And then a lot of people in the comments said, "Just go back and watch his fight with Dalby." And you know he's not going to watch it, but you have to think that there's maybe not handlers, but there's talent scouts. I mean, Graham Boylan being the biggest, the biggest guy talking about it, lost you for a second, but you have to think that somebody's in the corner saying, "Hey, sign Ross Houston." And again, not to segue too far away, but the fact that Nicholas Dalby re-signed to the UFC, and we're getting him in a fight against Cowboy Oliveira, who, Cowboy Oliveira, legal issues are apparently a non-issue, but why would you not run that fight back? Like you said, I mean, it seems silly. This is a fight that was ended due to an over amount of blood on the vinyl canvas that they have in Cage Warriors, which makes the surface very, very slippery. So yeah, I was just very surprised.
I say just say that to in Dana's ear, and he'll be like, "What? Blood canvas fight ending? Never heard that. Sign him."
Okay, I'm gonna head into the DMs. We should both, and maybe this is a call to everyone out there on social media. Send Robbie from Barstool a DM and tell him to tell Dana to sign Ross Houston. A good chance that might happen. So get on that quick, and I think it's a no-brainer for them to sign him. Now, if we roll on into our next fight, and I will bring up the tweet here in front of me, Volkan Oezdemir ends it with a bomb. I had this thought rolling around in my head all day. So Volkan Oezdemir was on a 3-fight losing streak. Who did Volkan Oezdemir lose to? Daniel Cormier, a rolling Anthony Smith, and Dominic Reyes, who I had scored that fight for Oezdemir. A lot of people had it scored for Oezdemir. If you had it for Reyes, I totally understand it. I personally had it for Oezdemir. This is a guy that was training out of Hard Knocks 365. He came over to Florida to be a member of the Black Zillions. I don't normally, and I'm not trying to name drop here, but when I did speak to Volkan Oezdemir before the Smith fight, it was right after his head coach and the man who had mentored him and brought him over to the Black Zillions had passed away. So it was a tough time for him, just, you know, on a personal level. Now he's having a hard time securing a visa to get into the United States. It was reported that him and his partner had split up as well. So things haven't been going Volkan Oezdemir's way personally or in the cage. Now, he trains a little bit in Thailand. He's getting ready for this fight. Ilir Latifi, from all accounts, has been training at home in Sweden for this one. You've got the cream of the crop of 205ers to train with there. I mean, just names like Jimmy Manawa, Alexander Gustafsson, Gokhan Saki, maybe none of those are great names for me to bring up, but still.
Well, they're both retired.
Yeah, I know.
As I spit everywhere.
Exactly. I'm just teasing. The point there is the best of the best at 205 really aren't in the gym for Latifi right now. And the way that the fight played out, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. A, was cardio an issue for Latifi?
Does a bear shit in the woods?
I don't know, man. I mean, I thought the knees set them up pretty well, but yeah, you're going to
go
with cardio.
No, you're right. Absolutely. The knees will take a lot of wind out of you. You're absolutely spot on with that. Yeah, no, but yeah. Oh, yeah. Cardio is certainly an issue.
So the other question I have for you. So Volkan Oezdemir in this performance, as well as the Smith performance.
Yeah.
In the Smith performance, Oezdemir seemed to be picking his shots, and there were points in time in that fight where he had Smith back up against the proverbial ropes, up against the cage, and he looked like he was going to be able to finish the fight. In this fight, he just kind of, it was just building off of that type of momentum, the fight that a lot of people thought he won against Reyes, and I thought he put on a masterclass of performance here. And I really do think, and I wonder if you think along the same lines here, Volkan Oezdemir, man, like, you should never write him off. He's definitely, without a doubt, and I know there's a number, 7 next to his name before this fight, he's a top 5 type of guy, and I don't think you can really take that from him.
No, and while his current stretch in his last 4 would potentially argue against that, that's a guy, in my opinion, in the Dominic Reyes fight, a fight that I believe you and I are on the same page in saying that Dominic Reyes probably didn't win that fight. That's a guy that, again, with the who are you saying yes to, that's a guy that and Alexander Rakic probably does not want to face. Hey, man, I think a fight between he and Jan Blachowicz makes a lot of sense. I don't know about makes a lot of sense, but, like, makes sense if Blachowicz can't go on to bigger and better things. Especially because Oezdemir, like you said, I mean, these are tough losses. You saw the Anthony Smith fight as up and close in person as anyone will. So I feel like you have as validated of an opinion on how he looked in that fight, and I couldn't agree more. The thing that – and I whiffed. I picked Latifi. And Latifi – I don't know where he goes from here either, man. Maybe the loser of Serkinov and Krut or Teixeira and Krylov. I don't know, man. I mean, like you said, there's not a lot of training bodies for him to go with in the gym right now either.
It's tough, and I mean, it's a shame that we don't get to see him, shirtless, riding horseback on the beaches of Miami. But and another guy that's really losing out of going to Florida again, Volkan Oezdemir. I mean, really quality training partners that he had there at Hard Knocks in some of the heavier weight classes. I know Steve Mowry's one of those guys that was close with him. I know Linton Vassell's another one of those guys, and you can say, hey, what have they done lately? But still, Steve Mowry undefeated at heavyweight, so it can't be a bad guy to be training with. It's a really interesting one. You have to wonder maybe what's next for both of those guys. And then a fight that we kind of profiled at the start of our conversation here is Davidson looks like he's freaking out. Do you have anything good in front of you?
Your tweet or quote tweet of Henry calling out Valentina.
Let's save that.
This is my... Yeah, okay. Sounds good.
Let's save that for a little bit as you peruse my Twitter timeline. And we'll talk about something really quick, and then we'll move on. Eduardo Garagorri taking on Umberto Bandenay. We talked about that from the outset. It was a really big surprise. And listen, I mean, the number's been all over the place. Macedo's win was in this number of seconds. Eduardo Garagorri landed this number of strikes. 69. And a good win there for Garagorri, beating Bandenay, a UFC vet, a guy that maybe we see him continue in the UFC, maybe we don't. He had that great win over Martin Bravo that we talked about earlier on. And now we get into the People's main event. And it was a great co-main event. We had this last week as well, a co-main event that a lot of people could really rally around. But Vicente Luque finally getting a big, big name that could really catapult him forward at 16-6-1, taking on Mike Perry, who's 13-4, if I'm not mistaken. So bringing up the tweets in front of me. A kiss for good luck from UFC Canada. Mike Perry walking into the cage. My next tweet, Mike Perry post-fight. A lot of people compared him to a pug. The last nose that I saw crumble that bad was Roger Huerta and Mr. Pitbull, and his nose went straight in. This one looked like something out of a horror movie. And then the next tweet is from Ariel Helwani, and of course, there's been better tweets since, but when I was setting this up, update on Mike Perry via his manager, Abraham Kawa. The surgery on his nose took an hour. He's in good spirits. We saw him after, of course, tossing the old bird up to everybody on social media. So it looks like Mike Perry is going to be all right. The other thing I will say, not allowed to have any contact for 6 months, which is really tough when you've got a bit of a hype train going. That's going to derail it a bit. But this guy has been there through, I want to say, thick and thin. We've seen him have some just absolute gaffes where he's fallen on his face and said just totally ridiculous things. We've seen him, and the one that's going to live on forever is him just acting like a total savage before one of his fights. We're going to war. And of course, his fight with Paul Felder being as good as it was. But this fight with Luque, listen, it did win a fight of the night bonus. Were you surprised how this fight took place or no?
No, not at all. I thought it was going to be violent. I thought it was going to be bloody. The only thing that surprised me was that it did reach the judges' scorecards. I thought that there would be a finish late. I thought this was the type of fight, kind of like the Barberena fight. And kudos to Barberena for coming, not obviously coming at Mike Perry, because that sounds very hostility-laced. But, reaching out to Mike Perry and acknowledging, hey, man, obviously you got to heal up, and paraphrasing his tweet best I can, go on your honeymoon, whatever. That would be a cracker of a fight for whenever he's ready, especially two guys that Luque has, put by the wayside in this year. What can you say about Vicente Luque and that sequence at the end where he's squeezing on the guillotine and the blood is seeping out of Mike Perry, and it's like it's starting to get that canvas-soaked look that the entire canvas a la UFC 189 looked like. Man, a great fight. I think a fight a lot of people expected on the violence scale. Good to know that Mike Perry is okay. Again, though, we sit here and say, who the hell is going to take a fight in the top? Who the hell in the top 10 is going to take a fight with Vicente Luque? I'd love to see him fight Ponzinibbio. I don't know if that's in the cards, though.
Yeah, I mean, Ponzinibbio is a guy that, in my mind's eye, just so much bigger than a guy like Luque. He's huge for the division, kind of like a Darren Till. One of those guys that I think of that we haven't seen him forever, and if he has a fight already booked, excuse me, but Neil Magny. Where the hell has Neil Magny been? It's
dealing with USADA.
It has been forever since we've seen Neil Magny. He's still ranked. He's one of those guys. In the Hector Lombard fight, man, that was an awesome first round, and I was surprised that Hector Lombard wasn't able to get the win. But we know the type of perseverance that Neil Magny has, and it especially showed in that fight. He's one of those guys that I think would take Vicente Luque outside of a first or a second round. And again, for Luque, and here's another question I have for you. He took a lot of punishment in that fight as well. He absorbed a lot of left hands from Perry. Were you surprised at all that he didn't attempt to take the fight to the ground?
Yeah, I was. I was surprised at that, and I was surprised that not only the left hand was landing all night long for Perry, the uppercut through the guard was money for Perry too. Both of those punches were absolutely cash money for Mike Perry that entire fight. So that kind of scares me a little bit in terms of Luque going forward and facing some powerful punchers in this division. Again, as the great Twitter legend Caposa would call it, we got the violence weight championship of the world on the line in China here in a few weeks between Zaleski dos Santos and Li Jingliang. I think the winner of that fight versus Luque would be a hardcore's wet dream. But like I said, man, the top 10. And here's my question back to you, the last one on this topic. Did you see Santiago Ponzinibbio's scrum? And did you see this man said he can make 155? This man said he can make 155, and he said that he could finish Khabib. Your initial thoughts on that statement is what?
Remember when Anthony Johnson used to make 170?
Oh.
And
or Tom Breeze.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean,
oh my God.
A, look at Tom Breeze now. B,
Dude.
Look at Anthony Johnson now. I mean, the guy weighed in, what? He weighed in at super heavyweight when he took on Craig Jones recently in a grappling event. Like, the guy's huge. So for Santiago Ponzinibbio, who, before your question, I said this guy looks huge for 170. I mean, he probably should be a 185er. For him to say that he can make 155, A, I think it's the perfect storm for him in South America. You're close to Argentina. You're wearing an awesome shirt, you and Jorge Masvidal. And apparently Chito Vera didn't get the memo because he went with, what was it, like a forest green beige type of shirt. that was a weird picture and a weird visual for me. But like you said, I think a hardcore's dream. You get the winner of Zaleski dos Santos, who's taking on Li Jingliang, to take on Vicente Luque. Mike Perry takes an extended vacation to heal up from the nose, to get married, what have you. And then he comes back and fights a guy like a Barberena. I mean, dare I say, maybe you put him up against Mickey Gall. I'd like to see that fight. But you want to have Mike Perry in these, knock him down, throw down type of fights. The only trouble is, A, how's the nose going to hold up after a fight like this? And B, is he going to be able to sustain this type of pace in future fights? I don't think he's the type of guy who's going to become, trigger shy or whatever you want to say. But it's just tough to tell. And for Luque, yeah, he's got to be one of those guys in the type of conversation like a Cyril Gane. Nobody's really going to want to face him in the top 15. And you talk about, and again, major gaffes by me, and me saying that, Liz Carmouche got the better of Valentina Shevchenko. I think I've said more ridiculous things in my existence. But listen, in this main event, is this one of the all-time slowest type of fights you've ever seen? I mean, I can think back to Ngannou and Derek Lewis, but, man, this was... The fans were booing. People on social media were upset. Media members were upset. What did you think of this?
Well, so imagine this scenario. I think one of the funnest tweets that got a lot of interaction from yours and I's colleagues alike, one that stuck out to me in the past couple months, was when somebody, I can't even remember the account, but I know a lot of us, gave our 2 cents, said, if you sat down a brand new, casual as hell, I know Conor McGregor, I know Nate Diaz, sat them down and said, here is MMA. What would be the first fight you show them? My fight would be Diego Sanchez, Clay Guida. That would be the one that I would show people. So habitually, I'm sitting in my room getting ready to watch this main event, and a neighbor of mine comes and knocks on my door. We had talked about what I do a little bit. He was a little bit intrigued. He wanted to watch the main event. Was pretty painful to sit through it and kind of vouch for the sport, because you know how it gets, man. I mean, as fans of the sport and fans of a growing sport, when you're trying to turn someone onto it or feel like you might be in that direction, you want to give them the entire entree and more. And whose fault is it that was not what materialized? It's got to be Liz Carmouche's. And if there's a following theme that I continuously coin for this card, it's that ways that these fights played out surprised me. The Gane submission, the only one that I thought was even remotely close to playing out how I thought was Barzola and Moffett. I thought for sure Carmouche was going to be urgent. I thought for sure Carmouche was going to go after it, and she didn't do that at all, except for the rabbit kicks from guard on bottom, which I was just, what were those?
Yeah, I mean, Liz Carmouche has got to be one of the most physically strong fighters, and just from the frame that she has and the power she's able to generate with some of her takedowns. But we didn't really see anything in this fight that would impress anyone. And the thing that really had me scratching my head was between the rounds when her corner was telling her that she's up. I mean, you have to kind of wonder, yeah, maybe that's going to pump up your fighter. But she also had, and I don't know if they talked about this in the commentary, the fact that she has the 125-pound champ in Bellator. And, I know Bellator is kind of like the boogeyman, the bad word that you're not supposed to use. But she had Alima McFarlane in her corner, who I would argue would give Shevchenko more of a fight than maybe a Liz Carmouche. I don't think she'd win that fight. But now the question becomes, for Liz Carmouche, I mean, she's been to the top of the hump at 35, same for 25. And listen, she's probably not going to get another title shot anytime soon. For Shevchenko, do any names at all come to mind at 125 that you think could really give her a run for her money?
Right now, no. But an interesting conversation came up to me. Will there be what comes first? Let's say Shevchenko and Nunes notch maybe like 1 or 2 wins, coinciding, either or, pick or choose who hypothetically wins 1, who wins 2, doesn't matter. Shevchenko going forward, let's say, if I had to guess, maybe Chukagian at MSG. They're going to need title fights on that card. She's already shown and already wants to be, active as a champion. Looked like she didn't have a scratch on her. Chukagian trains right up the street. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
especially with her ranking.
And she's always kind of eyeing a fight. Of course, she was at the top of the division. She's 12-2, so it's a decent record. It's something that you can sell. Like you said, somebody that's from, relatively close by. And she does have a loss to Carmouche, and then she had that split loss to I getting the title shot. But she beat Calderwood, who was really on a bit of a run. And we've seen some good things out of it. But to kind of go back, it's really, really tough. You still got I at the top, ranked number 1. You got Chukagian at 2, Carmouche at 3, Jennifer Maia, Calderwood, Andrea Lee, Viviane Arajau. Like, none of these fighters really bring anything huge to the table that I think, and I know now you want to pick Arajau and you think she's going to really give her a run for her money, but I just don't think anybody at 25 right now in the UFC, what are you going to say? And listen, all love, as they would say, but Jillian Robertson's looked great lately, and she's got a big fight coming up in Vancouver against Macy Barber. And yeah, maybe Macy Barber is, somebody that's going to have to contend later on down the line. Her title aspirations are incredibly high. She wants to beat John Jones, become the youngest champ in UFC history. But against Valentina Shevchenko and against some of the women in this top 15, I don't think that's going to happen. So to kind of backpedal a bit, I don't think anybody and it's not like I was setting myself up for this, but I just don't think, honestly, that anybody's really going to contend for this title anytime soon.
You would be fair to make that point, and there's 98% of what comprised your point I agree with. Here is my only 2 cents, and obviously the 98% of that is fueled by the fact that I agree with you, and I would pick Shevchenko within a window of probably 2 or 3 years from now to beat all of them soundly. And let me just correct any type of misunderstandings there might be. When you said who could challenge her, I suggested Chukagian maybe for her next fight. I'm not at all suggesting that Chukagian wins that fight.
No, I get you.
Yeah, but here's what I will say. Viviane Araújo is an interesting matchup. That's all. I'm, again, not saying she beats her, not saying she gives her a run for her money even. Could easily be 50-45 on all 3 scorecards in that one as well. But there are 2 girls I see ranked right now that I think, interesting stylistic matchup. Araújo being one of them. She's a rangy striker. She is, while I think the ingredients to beat Shevchenko, like they said on the broadcast last night, somebody's got to go for it. And, kudos to Jessica Ai for trying to do that. Obviously, she walked right into the fire and, got burned really badly for it. But, hey, she was a little bit more formidable than I would think Carmouche was over 5 rounds.
Yeah.
In just that little bit of time before getting finished. What I will say is Araújo gives one dynamic where she is very rangy. She's very accurate. She picks her shots. She is, she's a huge 115er coming over as the queen of Pancras. And Macy Barber is a wild card for me as well, because Macy Barber is a finisher, and Macy Barber will she is exuberant and overly auspicious in which she makes her intentions known, and I think we've all known that. She's talking about UFC gold before she even notches a win on the Contender Series. That's a girl that wants it. That's a girl that I think will go after Valentina. Again, do I think she beats her? No. Do I think that matchup could be interesting? Yes. And my final thing I'll say, aren't they fighting in Boston? I think you said Vancouver.
I thought it was. Now let's make sure and correct the record here. You're probably right.
I believe it's in Boston. She tweeted into Luke Thomas's new show. Do you watch any of that with him and what's his name?
Brian Campbell?
Yeah, Brian Campbell. Super good boxing guy.
We're not on SureDog. Now we check Tapology. And I'm sure it's going to be on there. For some reason, I thought it was Vancouver just because of the Canadian connection.
Of course. That card's pretty full at this point.
Better to be right. Now it says UFC on ESPN2, which they've been on ESPN. Weidman versus Reyes. Yeah, it's Boston. So good catch there. Hoping, crossing fingers, maybe we end up at that card as Fight Night picks, but who knows? It would be cool. I had the chance to be there for their last card, and man, that was a banger. I mean, UFC 220 was awesome. So, If we change gears a little bit, UFC from Uruguay, if I could give it a letter grade, oh boy, she was rough. But listen, this is a recap of the week, and I put it in brackets, and and typically Matt and I don't go this far into it, but we had a really good week of fights, and I'm going to put on a clip here from Twitter. You've got Vinny Magalhaes getting the win over at PFL number 6, and if you haven't been paying attention to the PFL season this year, there's been a little bit of controversy as far as how these fights are being put together. Of course, maybe one of the early controversies from the first season, no elbows. They don't want people to get cut up. But at the same time, this year, one of the bigger controversies is, like I said, matchmaking, the fact that there have been a few fighters that have missed weight, and then they're kind of jumbling and throwing some fights together. And
a few?
Yeah, many.
A lot.
But the sixth event that we had here, I mean, we had an Ezekiel choke. We had a lot of finishes, a lot of big wins. The fact that Jordan Johnson, who was undefeated in the UFC, and I think the UFC made a big mistake letting him go. Of course, he loses a fight in the PFL, is taking on a guy who at this point was 1-1. Some of the matchmaking, to me, I understand how it works, and I know that there's seeding involved. Some of the matchmaking is a little silly. I mean, you've got Francimar Barros that fought in the UFC, taking on a guy who at the time was 3-0. It's just a little head-scratching, but the topic of the night, apart from, Khabib Nurmagomedov's cousin Omar Nurmagomedov getting a win, was the fact that Vinny Magalhaes gets a first-round armbar, and this is a guy whose career has just been weird as all hell. I'm going to give the microphone over to you, Davidson. What did you make of the win here? And overall as a career, man, Vinny Magalhaes, what an odd cat.
Very odd, very peculiar. And I think while it is odd and it is a little bit all over the place, if you were to, for those that listen to this that play any type, do you play any video games, Craig? I know if Keith were here, he would say, I'm an adult. Games are for kids. But video games are for kids? Okay, well,
no, that's not my personal view. That's Keith's. Mine, yeah, I play a few.
Awesome. And me being 23, I still indulge as best as I can. And for those that would be familiar with the NBA 2K series, there's a feature at which you can plug some numbers in and put graphs together. And if you were to do that with the coinciding numbers that Vinny Magalhaes' career has been characterized by, it would be absolutely all over the place. I mean, going into last year's New Year's Eve card, I think obviously – if you like upsets and you like things that weren't supposed to happen, that card could have been one of your favorites of the year, being that I don't know what surprised me more, the Lewis Taylor knockout or the fact that Vinny Magalhaes, I thought Vinny Magalhaes was as surefire of a winner on that card. Even coming from me who, after watching years of Sean O'Connell just not give up and be historically haunted by bad stoppages. If you ever noticed, Sean O'Connell's kind of been on the bad luck side of the spectrum with bad stoppages. But Vinny Magalhaes, here's the theme that I noticed. He always starts off really well when he gets to a new promotion and then just tails off. Like wins his first one in the UFC, loses his next two. Wins his first 4 in the PFL, gets finished by O'Connell, gets finished by Emiliano Sordi. I don't know, man. It's a big win for him. He's got a tough fight against Rashid Yusupov next, though.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. And to kind of circle back, and I'm sure you're looking at his record. I have his record up on the screen so everybody can see it. But 4 first-round finishes. So like you said, a really quick type of guy. And then he takes on Sean O'Connell, and his gas tank totally evaded him in that fight. Like he was sucking for air at the end of the first round. Loses that fight, loses to Sordi, comes back, gets a big win over Rakeem Cleveland. And listen, if you're not really into Rakeem Cleveland, go way back into his career. He fought Derek Lewis at one point. That's crazy. But now, yeah, you've got Magalhaes taking on Rashid Yusupov. I'm not sure if there's any other big talking points from PFL number 6. I mean, in your main event, I was relatively surprised that Jared Rocholz was able to get the win over Satoshi Ishii. Satoshi Ishii, a guy who we saw him fight in KSW relatively recently and able to win there. And I'm going to pull up his record, as quick as the old internet can go. But, man, like, this is a guy that has a somewhat padded record as well. I will say his fight against Cali Gibrain de Oliveira in Heat 44. And then he went, so that was on the 2nd of March. And then on the 23rd of March, he took on Fernando Rodriguez Jr., who was a former Cage Warriors heavyweight champ. We're both looking at Tapology. Again, now I will say, Davidson, I am known as a bit of, Wikipedia handicapper. So I will use these as a crutch. Apparently, my big secret's out of the bag. I actually look at the internet, and then I go back and analyze fights. But I did watch the De Oliveira fight, and we did watch KSW 47. Yeah, I mean, just a really weird career. I mean, he beat Tony Lopez in 2018 by leg scissor choke. Of course, you'll know Tony Lopez from bare knuckle boxing and still fighting
everybody
5 times a week. So
that guy has literally fought every human being alive.
Yeah, he has. So realistically, were there any other standout performances from PFL number 6? And how closely have you been following? Because I will admit, from the clips here and there and me going back and watching some fights, I haven't been really, really invested. I know there's a partnership this year with TSN. Of course, last year I had to go way out of my way. You'd watch it on Facebook Watch. And up in Canada and internationally, you could watch the entire card there because NBCSN, we don't have it up here. And actually, there was one card where Facebook Watch didn't work at all, so I just couldn't watch an entire main card. But have you paid attention much to the season? And if so, have you been surprised at all by the season? Has it really, piqued your interest? And here's another one. This is a long chain of questioning. Do you think they're going to be able to sustain this? I know they have a lot of big investors, Tony Robbins, Kevin Hart, chief among them. Is this something that's going to be able to stick around for a long time?
Okay, so I will go on both sides of the coin, starting with the positives.
That's not
fair. Yes, I have been invested in this, and maybe that's the hardcore nature in me that kind of provides that, but also just because of my circumstantial surroundings. The PFL is what I have to sacrifice, being that, hey, man, I am kind of working towards that full-time MMA type of space. It's what I want to do in the future, but I still got to work at Buffalo Wild Wings, as you would say. And on Thursday nights I have to give up. I already have my Saturdays free to myself for the UFC, so I have to catch a lot of PFL on mute with Baker Mayfield preseason, tomfoolery, as you would call it, on sound next to it. So I'm constantly looking back and forth. I will say this about the card. The one performance that really stood out to me in a fight that I was super interested in, because a guy that I'm very familiar and friendly with, I've interviewed on a number of occasions, is Kelvin Tiller. Kelvin Tiller is a really, really awesome guy, a really, really, a really kind of misunderstood guy, in my opinion, from my time and getting to know him. He's always been very kind to me. He's always been very generous with his time. And I was rooting for him a little bit, obviously, with the undercover bias there. But I have nothing but unbelievable things to say about Goltsov, man. I mean, what a performance he put on against Tiller. Every time Tiller would get a takedown, because in the first round, he was just piecing him up so much to the point that I think it was Dan Miragliotta had to take a point away from Kelvin Tiller for losing his mouthpiece too many times. Yeah. Every time Tiller would take him down, Goltsov would transition. That guy would be my pick with every dollar I have in the bank to win that heavyweight tournament right now, after watching him absolutely dismantle a really good fighter at Kelvin Tiller.
Yeah, and I mean, the Mama's Boy, it was awesome what he was able to do season 1. It's awesome to see, a bit of a progression as far as... Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say I also didn't answer the second part of your question. As far as, and in a short way, as far as sustainability, you're giving the tournament winners way too much money. No, I give it another couple years at most.
Yeah, it's really tough. And then they want to try and hook even bigger stars into it. You want to get Chris Cyborg, which of course would be huge. And yeah, your financial commitments, for what? 3/4, 4/5? Well, realistically, it'd be 11/12 of the year. They're going to be relatively minor until you have to pay her $1 million when she beats Kayla Harrison or Sarah Kaufman in the finale. But, really changing gears, and I think that was a perfect segue into another card that we had over the week. We had Invicta FC 36, and I have it up in front of us. The finish that Emily Ducote was able to get in the first round of her fight. And this is a fight that you're really high on because you're high on her opponent. This is a gal... Listen, she's coming out of Lombard's Gym, and if you've never heard of Lombard's Gym, that's okay. It's an appendage of ATT, and you're going to find, namely, Hector Lombard there, his partner, Valerie Letourneau, I almost said Lareda, but Valerie Lareda, and a few other scrappy fighters out of that tiny little hole in the wall that they have there, but really not much has come of it. And I mean, yeah, Letourneau had a good run in the UFC. She had a title shot over in Bellator. Ducote also had some decent fights with Ilima-Lei Macfarlane, and now we're seeing her kind of ply her trade away from the Bellator squared circle. And here you see her in Invicta, and man, what a performance by her. And I really do think that she's somebody that could put together a string of wins and do something.
You know, I'm not going to... I've seen this said on social media a couple of times, and while I cannot believe someone would go to the length to completely ruin their credibility forever in front of everybody to say that Ilima-Lei Macfarlane would give Valentina Shevchenko a run for her money, I've seen people say that on Twitter, my friend.
It's not me.
That is insanity. However, I will give Bellator this. Their flyweight division is not bad. It's really not. And they're expanding and they're building, and they are committed to it. Now, here's what I will say. I think Emily Ducote, if you're the UFC and you need maybe a flyweight to take a fight on short notice, you know, obviously, I don't know. Unless I've missed something, Poliana Botelho needed an opponent for this Saturday. I would assume if they haven't found one by now, she's probably off the card unless they get her one in the next couple of days. If this was a fight like maybe 2-3 weeks out, Ducote, I would assume, either under the Invicta umbrella or a free agent, give her a sign. She's fought really talented and really tough opposition in Bellator. She's got an above 500 record, I think either 8-6 or 9-6. And like you said, a girl I was super high on, and I always botch her name, Yanisa Mirandin, who's only lost to, Yandaroba off the top of my head. Yandaroba, Ducote, and do you know who else? There's somebody else. Was it Lavinia Souza?
Yeah, I'm going to bring it up here so everybody can see it. I think it's Lavinia Souza. Yeah, Lavinia Souza, and then the last two, Ducote, and like you had said as well, she had a loss at the end of last year. And then, a lot of promise on her end. A lot of big wins there. Things haven't panned out for her in Invicta. Maybe Ducote's one of those ones that you can bring up to the UFC. There were two other things that I wanted to mention with this card. A, Victoria Leonardo taking on Stephanie Geltmacher. That was a fight that, listen, this is one that you're going to see clips of on social media for a little bit. Hopefully it gains some traction and really pushes Invicta because it was a really good fight. The other fight that I noticed on here, and listen, maybe it wasn't on everybody's radar, but it's one of those ones that it's a head scratcher. Jessica Del Bonte taking on Lindsay Van Zandt, and I'm going to click on Van Zandt here for a second because she's one that just kind of, I wouldn't say they threw her a bone, and she had competed with Invicta in the past. So she gets a win with King of the Cage. We know what kind of a promotion King of the Cage is like, letting fighters compete elsewhere, but apparently it was just a one-fight deal. Then she fights Tabitha Ann Watkins, and it was maybe a highlight reels, giving it a lot of credibility, but it was a good win over Watkins, who is set to compete in Rizin coming up soon. So then she fights Rina Kubota in a bit of a talent swap on Bellator 222. This is the same card that Kyoji Horiguchi comes over and fights Darren Caldwell on home turf, but this was on the prelims. This was a fight that I was really excited to see, and she gets a first-round rear naked choke win over Kubota. And the talk was to have Van Zandt, maybe she gets a shot over in Rizin, they share some talent, but she ends up going to Invicta, and I really think this loss hurts her. I know it's just a split decision loss, but man, all that momentum that you had beating an international star in Kubota kind of seems to be lost here.
Yeah, interesting you bring up Kubota too. I think that's a good point. Lost is a good term to kind of characterize it as, but I personally like this division, and the division, it's so great for the UFC to have like a feeder organization like an Invicta, like an unofficial thing. Thank God they're not, and other organizations don't play the stupid King of the Cage game. Oh my gosh, dude, I can't tell you how. I try not to get upset about things that don't concern me. I really do. But man, that bothers me what they're doing, particularly with Draco Rodriguez. I know I don't remember who else it was, but getting off topic, it's good that Invicta is kind of that backbone that the UFC can lean on to bring in talent and divisions that are developing. Here's my question back to you, because I saw it brought up earlier today. Someone said we need a women's 105 and a men's 165, a men's 195. Men's 165, there's pros and cons. Men's 195, let's slow down. Women's 105, I'm in. I call me crazy.
So it's one of those divisions, and I've had this conversation before. It's a division that you can sell in Invicta. You might be able to sell it. I know one championship has 105ers. It's going to be more popular in maybe Southeast Asia and certain other markets in the world. I just don't think there's a place for it in the UFC. I just don't think it's deep enough to try and sell it. If there was a chance that the UFC was going to cut the flyweight division, and listen, we've seen a resurgence. We talked about it tonight. I don't know if 105 makes sense. I mean, yeah, there's stars that you can build around, and of course you're going to have somebody who has a fight coming up very shortly, Michelle Waterson, that could probably move down and really push that division and try and solidify it. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I think 165 is a division that I would like to see. It's kind of that middle ground. I know it's only 5 pounds difference from that and welterweight, but I'd like to see that. And listen, I'd be tickled pink, and this is a perfect opportunity. You set me up for this. The Fight Night Picks Miami Vice shirts, they're available. DM me. You can get your hands on one. I would be tickled pink to see a cruiserweight division. I think that would make a lot of sense. I think 225 is where it's at. Of course, Jorgen De Castro coming into the UFC gets that great win on Contender Series. Maybe a lot of people were left wanting more. We didn't get to see a lot out of him. But I got to see him win his 225-pound title against Ross Hilton, who's got a fight coming up later on in September at NEF, coming at you from, it's in Orono, Maine at the university. So it's going to be awesome. I'm going to be there, so maybe people could reach out. And I can't do it cross-border, but Fight Night Picks t-shirts, maybe you order one and I send it across.
Dude, I'm going to order one.
Yeah. But yeah, that's me selling that. But yeah, for me, 165, 225 makes sense. Will we see either of them? Probably not.
Wait, but how would you do it? Like, you would do 205 as cruiserweight and then 225 and then heavyweight? Like, do 225?
Yeah, you'd have 205 as light heavyweight, 225 as cruiserweight, and then above that would be heavyweight, and no need for a super heavyweight. But yeah, to me, 225 is the perfect kind of middle ground, because you've got those really good heavyweights that are at 240. You've got, the guys that are kind of in between that could kind of play that role. Your John Jones at 225. There's a lot of fun fights there. So it's a division that we haven't seen. And just to backtrack a little bit, it was Anthony Romero with King of the Cage, the Canadian who's undefeated, and it's funny because Davidson and I talked about this before the show. We have Davidson up through Skype, through NDI, and I did a tag team interview with Anthony Romero, and he had it on his mobile device. And then if you go back and you look at Billy Quarantillo's record, and of course he's one of those guys that a lot of people are excited about him due to his Contender Series win. They want to see him fight in the UFC. They think he's going to have a lot of success there. It was his win in King of the Cage to bring him over to the UFC. A win over Adrian Valeca. And I had Anthony Romero and Adrian Valeca on at the same time and had issues with the picture. But to make a long story short, yeah, Anthony Romero was the guy that, another one of those guys that they wouldn't release from King of the Cage, which is just a knucklehead move, really.
I agree. And it just doesn't make sense from so many angles. So, you're ruining so many relationships by doing it. I couldn't agree more.
Not a great move. So before we leave, Davidson, do we miss anything else? There's a big chunk of fights that I'm leaving out absolutely on purpose. I don't want to give them any bit of the limelight. I'm talking about who really cares? Chase Sherman won a heavyweight title from the Police Gazette. Go check out that website. It hasn't been updated since like BKFC 4 or 5. I know I might be burning bridges here. I have all these people as friends on Facebook, but I really don't care. Listen, this was an organization that had an event for free. They apparently drew 200,000 pay-per-view buys. The one thing I will argue here, when they say that there was actually 18,000 pay-per-view buys, I know it's an approximation, but that was also television pay-per-view buys. most people are going to be buying it through Fight TV as well, or online applications. So it's kind of tough to gauge what the actual pay-per-view buy rate was. It was just a little weird that with BKFC 7, and you've got a guy in Leonard Garcia fighting on this card that people are getting excited about, that they had it for free. And I just thought that was weird.
Here's what I will say about BKFC. And I think a large sentiment and a larger, from what I understand and from what I see, I can only explain from what my vantage point gives me, but from a lot of the people you and I, associate with, a lot of people are just like, hey man, I got my concerns about this idea. I'm rooting for you, but I don't have the highest hopes for you. That's what I think about BKFC, but I will give them this. I have not watched the card. I've only seen a couple clips, but I've heard their card over the weekend was a banger. I heard there were a lot of KOs. I heard that there was a lot of action. From what I understand, and I'm saying this without watching the card, the people that did watch the card enjoyed what they saw. From, like I said, just from what I see on Twitter, I can't provide, an opinion to back that up because I haven't watched it myself, but I will give them the benefit of the doubt in that regard.
I will leave you with the fact that they blew their load in the 6th iteration, and you can't get bigger than Molinagi and Lobov, and you're never going to be able to duplicate it, replicate it, or otherwise. So we'll leave that where it is. Davidson looks like he's blowing his load on camera. And that was the weekend / in brackets the weekend recap. As always, you can find us, and I will give Davidson his plug. You can find us, myself and Matt, on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP, at Matt Allen FNP. We're going to add these weekend recaps to the weekly show. We are way into it. We had, a lot of fun here in this episode. Now, I will throw it on over to Mr. at Dave Bake MMA. Davidson, where can we find you online? Thanks so much for coming on to the show, and what can we look forward to from you in the week coming?
Hey, man, thank you for being patient with me. I know I was a little tardy, doing my daily duties as a server at Buffalo Wild Wings, but I appreciate you for being patient with me. A show that I've always liked, a lot of clips that I've always liked from you, and try to repost too. Those 2-minute breakdowns are some of my favorites. You can find me at Dave Bake MMA. You can always find me on FanSided, Cageside Press, and MyMMA News. You can always, after all Bellator events, you can always find my Bellator Matchmaker articles. I do that for Cageside Press. Obviously, I haven't done one of those in a while, but you got Bellator coming up soon. And recaps on FanSided. I've kind of been slow the past couple of weeks, but I've got some things cooking.
And
Bottom Line coming
links,
this week too.
Yeah, and Bottom Line this week, Between the Links coming out Monday night. You can find us both there. Really looking forward to that. And yeah, this wraps us up for the weekend recap. Thanks again for Davidson coming back, or maybe is this the inaugural? Is this the first time?
Yes, it is.
This is crazy. But really looking forward to the rest of the episode. Round number 1, Twitter Purge, and the 2-minute breakdowns coming out this week. Everybody knows this part of the show. Let's get into it.